Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. The Omicron variant continues to ravage our state. More than 11,000 new cases were reported today alone, and consequently, many businesses and schools have been forced to close over the past week. At the legislature, bill filing continues, and true to form, many of those proposed laws are, arguably undemocratic, unconstitutional, and just generally bad. Of course, as we said last week, those are the ones we tend to hear about this time of year. Undoubtedly, there will be some better ones, and we'll discuss some of the good, bad, and ugly bills today. The Supreme Court made a ruling that was related to the previous McGirt ruling. The governor is, forcing people to remove from or to step down from positions. It's another week in Oklahoma politics. Joining me today to discuss this stuff and more are my two lovely co-hosts, Bailey Perkins. Hello.
Hello, Andy.
And happy birthday, we should say.
Thank you so much. It's great to be 32.
Oh, hey, great. And also Dr. Scott Melson. Hello, Scott.
Hey, man, how are you?
I'm well. Happy Friday to you all. There's a snowstorm coming. Do you guys know about this?
No.
Yeah, I had heard this, that we're going to get single-digit wind chills by tomorrow morning with a trace of snow on the ground tomorrow night.
Because it's like, what, 64, 65 today?
It's 62 right now as we
So
record
that's a
this.
massive jump.
Yeah, that's typical. Just like this is so far in 2022, things cruise along and then they change sharply, whether it's the weather or COVID or whatever else. I think it's just unexpected train wrecks all the time. Okay, well, speaking of train wrecks, let's start with the dominant issue of the week, I guess, which is COVID, right? And its impact on schools and education policy as well. We'll try to make that strong connection to Oklahoma politics and government. Scott, do you want to give us a quick overview of where we're at today?
Everything is very bad. Everything is very, very bad indeed. No, I mean, we're seeing more COVID than we've ever had. I will tell you in terms of my level of busyness at the office, seeing patients with COVID, answering COVID questions, it's been the last 2-3 weeks have been more intense really than they've been more intense for me than at any point in the pandemic, other than when I was in the COVID unit last year at the hospital. And it's been everybody's sick. Fortunately, most people are their symptoms are mild, and it's very important when I say mild that you understand not sick enough to require hospitalization. That's what I mean when I say mild. It doesn't mean they don't feel horrible. Most of them feel absolutely terrible, particularly if they're unvaccinated. But even some of the vaccinated people have pretty significant symptoms. But it is true that most people, their symptoms are not serious enough to require supplemental oxygen or hospitalization. In terms of therapeutics, meaning the monoclonal antibody infusion and the oral antivirals that have recently been approved by the FDA, are increasingly hard to come by. Everybody's sick, so everybody needs them. And for a variety of reasons, our supply in Oklahoma is not as robust as it could be. That has to do with the way that the supplies are being distributed by the federal government and how we are reporting COVID cases. So the feds are trying to send supplies to where there are the most cases, and so if you're not reporting as many cases, you don't get as many therapeutics. So that's where we are there. Despite that, we are despite being in the middle of this wave, it is still vitally important that if you're not vaccinated, you get vaccinated. So if you've not been vaccinated, please get vaccinated. If you've been vaccinated twice with an mRNA vaccine but haven't gotten your third dose, please go get the third dose. I want to be careful here. Notice I'm not calling it a booster. It's not a booster. It is now accepted that full vaccination, right, to be considered fully vaccinated against COVID, is to complete a 3-dose series. And so it's not a quote unquote booster. It's the third dose that you need for maximum protection.
Just like hepatitis B.
There it is. If you receive J&J, if you got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, please get 2 doses of an mRNA vaccine. It's not too late. There is still a point. So definitely, if you're not vaccinated yet, please get vaccinated. I talked a patient into her first vaccine yesterday. I told her, I said, "You've made my day." And she was like, "Really?" And I was like, Yes, I am super happy that you decided to get vaccinated. So anyway, that's where we're at. But I would definitely recommend that everybody, now, if you're sick of being in you're sick of being at your house and want to go out and get around the town and do stuff, now is not the time. Unless if you're going to go to if you want to go see like there's a Broadway show in town this weekend that several people are excited about. I'm one of them. I do plan to attend. I'll be wearing an N95 mask the whole time. We'll put it on before we get inside, and I won't take it off till we're back to the car. So, but that is the level of protection that you need to try and not contract this version of the virus.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, I wanted to mention it's even more important because of the Supreme Court ruling striking down President Biden's vaccine and testing mandate. So the Biden administration had a administrative rule through OSHA that any business that has over 100 employees either has to require their staff to get vaccinated or to get weekly testing done on COVID of their employees. And there's a lot of folks who didn't like it, including our governor and attorney general who have been fighting it. And the Supreme Court ruled yesterday that businesses don't have to abide by that ruling. And so it's truly up to us to protect ourselves at this point. So do everything that you can.
Yeah, goodness. Well, yeah, and if it feels like everyone has COVID right now that that's because it's probably true, right? I mean, there's the numbers we know about, the cases we know about are like 1 in 50 have it today, right? Based on the active number of cases, 79,000 something today. So 1 out of 50 have it today that we know about. However, that's not all the cases, right? There's a lot more folks that tested rapid and it's not reported or are asymptomatic and don't even know they're infected right now. And so I think Scott, right? The real number of active cases today is probably 1 in 20, maybe as low as 1 in 10. Just everybody. I think as we were discussing before we started recording, Bailey said it's at the household level, right? Like basically someone in every house in Oklahoma probably has it, if you want to think of it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I assume that everybody I come into contact with outside my household, which is just me and Ashley, I assume that everyone I come into contact with has COVID.
Yeah. And, my wife works in healthcare, and so she's been getting tested every few days. She got tested this morning again as a precaution because she has to see patients some, right? And just like Scott, I know tests regularly. It is important to be conscientious. We also made the decision, this is on a more personal note, to not have my 2 older kids come this weekend, right? They're going to stay with their mom this weekend because they've been in school until their school closed down today. They are not symptomatic. They're both vaccinated. But most kids in their school don't wear a mask because they're in Edmond schools, and Edmond changed to masks optional or recommended, but not required this semester. And so there's, a ton of people that have it. And between them and my wife, we don't want my wife to unknowingly bring COVID in here and give it to them if we could avoid it. We also don't want them to bring it here, right? We have a baby who's not eligible to be vaccinated. And so it's one of those things where looking at the data, it's way higher today than it was 2 weeks ago. And it is likely higher today than it will be in 2 weeks, Lord willing, right? That will be on the tail end of this surge. And so we were like, well, I talked to their mom and we decided, let's just not get together this weekend, right? So sometimes you got to make the tough call for the greater good.
Speaking of the decision by multiple school districts, not even the decision by school districts, but the law that passed last year forbidding schools from requiring masks at during school hours.
But we need to require them to be in the building.
How do we feel like that's working? How do we feel like it's working out? Making it illegal for schools to take mitigation measures.
Apparently, it's still the school's fault, according to the sentiment of some leaders in the legislature, the governor's cabinet, with the idea that why can't we just get other people from churches and nonprofits and all these other places? Why can't schools just pull from extra folks? And so I facetiously made a comment on one of my friends' posts that said that school bus driver could have just got off the bus, walked into a classroom, subbed, washed his hands, served food in the cafeteria, went back to the classroom and subbed, and hopped back on the bus to take the kids back. You know what I'm saying? Like it's literally, and I know that's, facetious, but schools are literally pulling as many people and resourcing as possible, especially because a lot of the support staff are already underpaid, right? And so now we're asking them to do double duties in some areas. And there's a lot of school professionals who are having to do all kinds of things just to try to keep schools open. And schools have reached their capacity. And that's a systems level issue and not a school districts aren't trying issue.
We're still kind of on the COVID thing. So just got an update from Metro, the 4 big hospital systems here in the Metro. So SSM Health, which is St. Anthony, they are currently treating 184 COVID-19 patients in the hospital. They have 0 ICU beds available. OU has 129 COVID-19 patients in the hospital. They have 0 ICU beds available. Mercy has 99 COVID-19 patients in the hospital. They have 0 ICU beds available. And Integris has 273 COVID-19 patients in the hospital. They have 0 ICU beds available.
Scott, this feels like deja vu because we have talked about this very thing on this podcast and we thought that things were going to be different. And here we are back in literally the same scenario that we heard about the distress on our healthcare system.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, it is in some ways more difficult this time around because even though the healthcare workforce is largely vaccinated and many of them have gotten that 3rd dose, there's so many people sick, right? I mean, the hospital systems, all of the hospital systems have literally hundreds of people are out sick, and most of them are going to be fine, and they're going to come back. But that's still 5 days that you're trying to operate with a skeleton crew, right? I mean, I think about y'all think about your offices. How would you function if 10% of your workforce was out every day, or 20% of your workforce was out every day? And then now imagine that workforce is taking care of the sick people.
And Scott, one other thing we talked about before the pod started was there are other things happening even outside of COVID. And when all of those ICU beds are taken, that means people who are also facing other life-threatening conditions aren't going to be able to get the care that they need. Right.
On the note, on a lighter note, going back to just inviting people to come in and quote teach, we all agree that kids learn best in the classroom, right? And not having to cycle in and out. However, a ton of kids were not in the schools because they were sick. Secondly, a ton of teachers were not at school, and it was just getting worse, right? And so there's
because there are a lot of teachers who are parents.
Yeah.
Right. And so if their kid is exposed,
right,
then they got to be able to quarantine and take care of their kids, right?
And then expecting business people to come in and fill just a warm body in a classroom doesn't mean that kids are learning. And also many businesses are closing because they don't have enough employees, right? So you can complain about the supply chain, but then you want people to take the day off work from a business that's already struggling to come over here. It doesn't make any sense. However, our friend Nathan Poppy here in Oklahoma City just tweeted something I thought was pretty funny. The chain of command, if your elementary school teacher is out sick. First, up next is the substitute teacher, then the principal, then the fastest kid in school, then the second fastest kid in school, then the water fountain, then the tallest girl with glasses, then the shortest boy with braces, and finally, 8th, the class pet. Those are that's Nathan's suggestion for the chain of command if your teacher's out sick.
Can we just say that the Secretary of Education, Ryan Walters, hit a sore spot on this topic?
Yeah, so someone who should be in a chain of command for something, Secretary Walters tweeted about this. Do you happen to have his tweet handy? I'm sure most of our listeners saw it.
Well, and while we're doing that, someone brought up the ratios on Twitter, how you can tell whether someone really someone's tweet is really supported, or if they're really getting dragged out for their comments. And there were single digit likes on Secretary Walters' tweet, and there were hundreds. And actually, I think on the second tweet, because there was a 2-part tweet, the second part had like thousands of like retweet responses. So people had a lot to say about his response to schools and the approach that they're taking.
So can y'all explain ratio to me? What it means to get ratioed?
So like, if someone likes a bunch of your tweets and you don't get a lot of responses to it, typically that means like, yeah, a lot of people agree with you. But if you don't get a lot of the hearts and you get more people commenting, the ratio then is
I see.
more on the you stepped on the landmine than you said something that the people like, right?
Well, here is the tweet that they got the secretary ratioed, as the kids say. He says the first reaction should not be to shut schools down. It is the last resort. Parents are tired and children suffer when administrators act out of fear and not in the best interests of their kids and their future. I call on schools to use all of their available resources and administrative staff to cover classes to ensure all of our students are given an in-person education option. They should fulfill their obligation to educate our kids in Oklahoma. So, guys, what do you think of the odds that Carly Atchison wrote that tweet? Do you think the governor's office wrote that tweet for him?
I don't think the governor's comms person wrote that. I truly believe Secretary Walters tweeted that in the moment and really thought that was going to be a noble response when teachers and administrators.
Is that out of touch? So it's just.
I mean, but he's also never been an administrator, right? And that's part of the critique that people have given him through his appointment, because everybody's like, remember, he was a Oklahoma Teacher of the Year finalist. That doesn't mean that he knows how to operate a school or a school district. Doesn't mean that he understands emergency response in schools. That doesn't mean that he has a lens on the ways that schools approach emergency situations like a pandemic, right? And so a lot of school administrators saw this as a slap in the face, especially we're in a season when morale is really low for school districts. We know that there are many children who are behind. We're losing a lot of educators. And it's just a trying time for every profession, but especially education. And then this came as a feedback with no real solution. Like, you guys should be using every available resource, as if they're not. Right. As if they're not using the data to try to inform their decisions to keep kids and teachers and parents safe.
I mean, the responses were like, the hell you think we're doing, bro? Like, are you kidding me right now? Like
especially the superintendent from Middale. Oh yeah, he was hot.
Pissed. I mean, I think he called it like ignorant, asinine. It was basically like said like, fight me right now. Like is kind of was the tone of his the tone of his tweet. And then and then the governor put out some statement that basically echoed the same thing that Secretary Walters put out. I mean, I want to say yesterday we had 91 school districts across the state that were out, and I'm sure it's only gone up today.
It was almost half today.
I mean, Edmond was out today. It's gotten bad if Edmond and Broken Arrow was out. If Edmond and Broken Arrow are shutting down, it's bad.
Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure teachers don't want to do virtual teaching.
No.
Right? That was a really difficult transition for a lot of educators who do best when they can lay eyes on their kids, right? When they can be there for that hands-on instruction, right? That's not the number one choice of schools is to go virtual, right? Unless that's the way the school is designed. So this idea that schools intentionally want to send kids home to learn, to me, is very out of touch. And that's exactly the way that teachers and superintendents across the state and other school professionals took it, because you have a lot of, like I mentioned, a lot of educators who are wearing multiple hats, doing their best. They're burnt out. And then to hear one of the, top leaders, I mean, whether he's appointed or not, he's still an extension of the top leadership of the state, to basically say you're not working hard enough, you're not trying hard enough. That hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, they took it like the asinine out of touch comment that it is.
Well, but he did, before we go into that, he did go to Santa Fe South Charter School by invitation from Chris Brewster to sub, right? And that's even getting critiqued, right? Some people are saying that was, a way to get a photo op. Some people are saying that it wasn't genuine, right? I think the hard part is that you can't make a comment like that and then immediately go sub in a school and say, okay, look, everybody, look what I'm doing. Because, I mean, it just kind of puts, salt to the injury.
That's right. Don't write checks don't let your mouth write checks that your ass can't cash. Isn't that how the
Are you writing the Top Gun reference? Like, Maverick, your ego's writing checks your body can't cash.
Well, and Andy, on that note, though, for Secretary Walters, it's important to know that he's running for state superintendent, right? And he's going to have a lot of backtracking and work to do to earn the trust and respect of school administrators and teachers across the state. One of his opponents, Dr. April Grace, who is the Shawnee Public School superintendent, tweeted that she's giving a shout out to all of the teachers and educators out there working hard, and especially the kindergarten teachers. I believe she had some photos of her in her schools actually helping to work with kids. And I think she was working with the kindergarten class. And so there was just such stark difference between how he responded and how one of his opponents, for state superintendent responded. And so that's going to be an uphill battle for him, because people aren't going to forget this.
Yeah, hopefully not. And I mean, I think the idea that he could say, hey, this is what people should do. And then folks said, well, are you going to do it? And he got called by, a friend at a charter school, and he went in for 2 hours out of the whole day. It's like, okay, well, you did a half-assed job at the thing that you were telling everyone else to do. Right. And perhaps he wasn't able to, perhaps his schedule didn't allow, for the same reason that most people can't, right? Like it really is a struggle. And so it just seemed like, armchair quarterbacking what should be happening in the schools by someone who doesn't work in the schools every day, who doesn't see it in the same way, right? And it is often, I mean, we're guilty of this too. Like we do it on the podcast all the time, right? About policies and how things should happen. But we're also not the ones that are in charge. We're not the governor's cabinet member, in charge of helping set policy for this kind of thing. I didn't see much, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't see much from Superintendent Hoffmeister the last couple of days. Have you guys seen anything from her office, or is she laying low because she has her own campaign to worry about?
Well, I saw an email that said that she hit a record, and I don't know if this is for the quarter, but probably likely that she's raised $500,000. And I'm pretty sure that these fumbles that are being made and the way that COVID in schools are being handled is doing nothing but fueling, her campaign run. So I think that is interesting too, and maybe even strategic to not even get into the discussion, but just let people put foot in mouth.
Andy, when was it last year you asked if COVID was going to be a factor in the 2022 election?
And again, I mean, here's the thing. It's only January, right?
I mean, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
We've got almost 11 full months between now and the election, and the world could look very different. We know from polling, and I had taken issue with this. I think if you listen to 538 Politics podcast, they address this as well, the good use of polling or bad use of polling. When some local outfits, right, Amber Integrated and others, have polled and ask respondents, what's your top priority? What's the top issue for you? and people say economy, not COVID, I would say too many pollsters are interpreting that as that people are no longer concerned about COVID, but that's not the case. I think it has become such a part of everyday life that there are other things that are perhaps more urgent, but just as important, right? And so I think clearly this week has demonstrated that it is still a huge deal that still disrupts life in many ways.
Well, and Andy, I want to take something back that I said about Superintendent Hoffmeister because she did respond on January 11th when Secretary Walters made that tweet. She said, it's a 4-part tweet. Our students are paying the ultimate price for the lack of leadership from the governor's office during this pandemic. Schools need to be open, and school leaders are doing everything in their power to make that happen. Pretending the pandemic doesn't exist does nothing to solve the problem. In fact, it makes it worse. This week is living proof. It is past time to stop pitting Oklahomans against one another and exploiting a public health crisis. Our first reaction should be do the right thing and lead by example as Omicron rages. We must keep schools open and minimize disruption by reducing spread of the virus. Get vaccinated, get a booster shot, wear a mask, stay home if you're sick, and test if you have any doubt. For the sake of all children and their families, we must take this pandemic seriously. I will continue connecting with school leaders, sharing support in every resource possible as they face tough realities. We'll get through this together. On her first tweet, because we talked about ratioing, right? So this is a great example about the opposite from Secretary Walters' tweet. Superintendent Hoffmeister has 605 likes, and she has 22 quoted tweets, and then she has 78 retweets, right? So the ratio is the opposite. Like the comments that she's getting on her thread are, this is awesome, thank you so much, and blah, 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 blah. And then she has a whole bunch of likes signaling that people like her response. It was the opposite with Secretary Walters' tweet, where he has 94, I think,
likes, like 550
likes.
comments.
And yeah, and all the comments of people not being happy. So, but she did speak out, and I think the way that she phrased it weaved the idea that it's not ideal for kids to not be in school, but the way to keep kids in school is to do the things that mitigate COVID. So,
Yeah. Well, let's move on to a couple of other topics. One, just a brief mention, is that the Supreme Court of the U.S. Issued a ruling today or this week related to the McGirt decision, but they basically decided to not do anything that would overturn it. Right? The state of Oklahoma, as listeners you well know, the state has asked the Supreme Court through various different cases to basically
can y'all
overturn.
look at this again?
Yeah. And as I think Scott texted me when the ruling came out on Monday or Tuesday, like, well, the court doesn't want to go back on what they ruled on less than a year after they did it. And like, that's exactly right. They were going to stick with their opinion. So far, no changes there. So I guess it's no news is good news. But today, just a couple of hours before we began recording, um, it was announced that the chair of the state's Pardon and Parole Board, Adam Luck, had announced his resignation, which he said he did at the request of the governor. And he has since been replaced by a man named Edward, I think it's pronounced Koneski, but I'm not certain. So it's don't hold me to the pronunciation, but he is I think a minister, a bishop, and a former police officer. Now, Adam Luck, in his resignation, said that he was resigning from the Pardon and Parole Board because he has come to realize he does not believe that anyone should be executed. He is against the death penalty, which is not an opinion shared by the governor. Now, the people on the Pardon and Parole Board are appointed by the governor, but do they serve at the pleasure of the governor? Like Scott is shaking his head no.
I did not have a chance to look this up today, but I had looked this up previously when we were, in the wake of the Julius Jones case. I believe that this is a board where once the governor appoints them, they serve until the governor's term is over, and they can only resign of their own volition. So the governor could ask them to resign, but he can't remove them the way he did with the doctors on the state board of the healthcare authority or the state board of education. He can ask them to resign, but he can't pull them off. They have to say, yes, I agree.
So they're appointed for the duration of the governor's term.
That is my understanding.
That's
yes.
a weird way to do it. Do you know if that means that they would have termed out at the end, like after this?
I think they have to be reappointed.
So reappointed.
Yeah.
So, well, let's say, so if Adam Luck had said, no, I'm not resigning, I'm going to stick it out for the next 12 months, then I guess.
Then I think the governor would have, then I think his term would have been over and the governor could have appointed somebody else, I believe is the case.
Oh, interesting.
But I think this tracks the behaviors that we've seen over the past few years, that if you have a belief system that's crosshaired with the governor, he will remove you, right? So if you do not believe what the governor wants you to believe in the way he wants you to believe it, he will pull you from your office. I mean, we just saw that with the National Guard, right? Just a few months ago. And now we're seeing the same thing with Adam Luck and his role on Pardon and Parole Board.
Yeah, no, I think he just wants to be surrounded. The governor wants to be surrounded by yes men, right? People who will agree with him and do his bidding. And that is, from a leadership perspective, not the best way to lead, right? You want people who will challenge you, who will push back, who will not acquiesce to your point of view. Now, I would say from a good leadership perspective, from a authoritarian leadership perspective, right? Someone who wants total control, I get it, right? It is much easier to be the person who has, total control over your company, your organization, your entity, right? To be the final authority. But the reason that our government here in America is designed with checks and balances, and the reason that we have so many boards and commissions in our state, right, and so many elected positions, is because the power does not rest and should not rest with a single individual at the top, right? There's a reason that we went to war with England, to part ways with a monarchy, right? And there's a reason that we established 3 co-equal branches of government, and the reason that we have so many checks and balances on that government, and so many ways that the public can be involved and can help govern ourselves, right? We are a self-governed people, and it's to ensure that we don't live our lives based on the whims of a particular individual. And so it is frustrating when you see this kind of stuff happen, right? Where someone, and I don't know if there's conversations that happen in the background where they got to this decision and said, okay, like this is a mutually agreed upon decision, or if it was, if there were some kind of threats levied, right? Like I don't know if there's, with politics, you always wonder if the person in power has something on the other person, right? Some kind of leverage they could use to lean on them to get them to say or act or behave in a way that they want them to.
I have mixed feelings on this. So on the one hand, I think that the governor and any executive, whether it's the president, the governor, whatever, does have the, I don't want to say the right. I think it is reasonable for our elected executives to feel that the people they appoint to positions, should, one, be able to exercise their best judgment, but two, should largely align with the philosophical viewpoint of the governor or the president, whoever, right? Like, I don't think anybody would expect Joe Biden to appoint, a member of the Trump administration to some executive post, right? Like, I don't think that's what we would expect. So but
the governor appointed
he did
these people that he's now pulling, and it's been several, right? It's not just a couple. So it just makes me wonder.
No, I agree.
Are you even appointing people, and do you know their
Right. The fact that he's
political philosophy and belief systems.
right. So that's what I was going to say. The fact that the governor has had to replace so many people shows that one, he doesn't vet these people as well as he either should before he does, right? Or these people have changes of heart. They learn new information. They become experts in the areas in which they've been appointed to serve. And once they do that and they disagree with the governor says, "I don't want you to serve anymore." Neither one of those are markers of a good leader. So I'm not here to defend the governor in that respect. I'm just saying, I can understand, I can understand Adam saying to the governor, "Look, I've come to a place doing this work where I now understand about myself that I don't support and will not support the death penalty in any circumstance." And I can see him saying to the governor, like, that's obviously not the stance that you have. So if you want me to resign, like, I will, because we're on different pages about this issue. However, I can also see the validity of someone who might say, "Hey man, he got appointed. He's under no obligation to resign. And if that is what he feels is the best use of that office, then he has an obligation to stay there and to stay there and make that viewpoint heard throughout his tenure, to give voice to the people who oppose the death penalty, and to say that, hey, this is something I don't think we should be doing in civil society, and I'm going to use my position of kind of authority in this matter to say that." So I can see both sides. I can see him, because Adam is a person of integrity, I can see him on the one hand feeling like he has an obligation to step down because he knows he is not aligning with the person who appointed him. I can also see the argument for, "Hey man, why don't you stay and like fight the good fight?" So I see both sides, and I like Adam a lot, and I just, for me, I can't really fault him. I think he is doing what he feels like is the honorable thing, and I'm never going to fault somebody for that.
Yeah. And I do think this is probably highlights what we said a few minutes ago when we were discussing education and Secretary Walters and all of that. That, Scott, I think you're right. I mean, it's easy to think or to believe one thing, right? When you're just living life, when you're not having to make the decisions. And then you get in that position, like on the pardon and parole board, where you're hearing case after case after case. I mean, hundreds, right, of applications for this, and you are having to really weigh this, and you're thinking about these cases of,
And Andy, he said he's heard thousands of cases over the past 3
yeah,
years.
Oh yeah.
right,
Oh yeah.
and that undeniably and rightfully so will have an impact, right, and perhaps change how you think about an issue, right? And it is, whether it's something like the death penalty, where you suddenly have maybe not the final power to say if someone lives or dies, but you have influence in that. That's
Especially when we see a number of botched executions,
yeah,
right?
yeah, right. And you start thinking, man, okay, well, what are we doing to rectify this situation?
I mean, that's where I am. I think this is, on the one hand, this is yet another example of the governor wanting to have direct power and influence, and not have anybody in any position he gets to appoint that disagrees with him. But I understand why Adam stepped down. The fact that he's replacing him with a police officer just makes me, I mean, that's just gives me a headache. I don't know anything about, is it Kanitsky? How do you say his last name, do you
Yeah,
think?
I haven't heard it said out loud, and it's been a minute since I lived in Minnesota where we had more names that were spelled this way.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess it's Kanitsky. Um, uh, but that's could be completely wrong. He's also been bishop and president of the Episcopal Church, so I don't know what his feelings are on the death penalty and the criminal justice system more generally. But we shall see. Um,
Yeah.
who did the gov endorse in the mayoral race in Norman? I assume it was not Bree Clark.
Yeah. So Governor Stitt has formally endorsed Nicole Kish for the mayor of Norman. I believe she's a member of the Unite Norman group.
She's one of those people that thinks Norman should secede from Oklahoma.
I don't know if she's that far.
There's about 4 people running, so
Yeah, she attended the Stop the Steal rally on January 6th in Washington, D.C.
Oh, good. So he's endorsed an insurrectionist.
Well, she said as she's experienced the rally at a distance, and so it was very crowded. So they went back to the hotel to watch on TV. And once violence broke out, she immediately booked a flight home. Whether or not that's true or not, that's the right thing to say if you're running for mayor, I think.
especially in Norman.
Yeah, right. Which is historically a fairly blue town, but man, local politics there has been a hot mess for the last couple of years.
Does the governor know she's Canadian?
What's that?
Does the governor know she's Canadian?
Is she Canadian?
Yeah, she's from Saskatchewan.
Really?
Yeah. Do you know that? Thought everybody knew that.
I don't. That she's from Saskatchewan? No, sorry, I don't know the origin of all the mayoral candidates in the state.
No, she's Dr. Nicole Kish, doctor of optometry, originally from Saskatchewan, up in Canada.
Well, hey, there we go. All right. Yeah, apparently he endorsed her due to his personal connection with being raised in Norman. I also didn't know that the governor was raised in Norman. I thought he was always a Tulsa man.
So he has ties to Tulsa and Norman. Yeah, because he graduated from Norman Public Schools.
Oh.
I don't know if it's Norman High or Norman North, but
Mhm.
I know it's for sure one of the Norman schools he graduated high school from.
Interesting.
I do feel like it is important for me to say, so I don't get accused of being xenophobic, that she does say on her campaign website that she became a U.S. citizen in 1999, and it is one of the proudest moments of her life. And apparently, she also served in the Oklahoma Air National Guard. So there we go.
Interesting. I don't know enough about the candidates in Norman to make an informed decision. I'm not endorsing anybody. I don't live there. It's not my deal. However, Oklahoma City does have a mayoral election as well. As a reminder, listeners, these mayoral elections, as well as mayoral elections around the state, and I think school board as well, are on February 8th.
February 8th.
So that's just a little shy of a month from right now. Today, as we record this on January 14th, is the deadline to register to vote for that. So if by some chance you are listening to this podcast and are not yet registered to vote, you have probably missed the boat for that. You can still register, you just can't vote on February
in this
8th.
election.
But you should go ahead and register and just vote in the next election for which you are eligible. Speaking of the mayoral election for Oklahoma City, David Holt is running for re-election. There are, I think, 3 other candidates, and in fact, NonDoc is hosting a debate for candidates. That debate will be held on January 25th at 5:45 p.m. at the auditorium at the Douglas here in Oklahoma City. It'll be streamed, I believe, on the News 9 Facebook page, probably on NonDoc's Facebook page as well. Incumbent Mayor David Holt has declined to participate thus far. So I suspect, given his ranking in the polling, he sees nothing to be gained by participating in that debate, which I get, right? So the opponents are
Jimmy Lawson.
Yeah, Jimmy Lawson, Carol Hefner, and Frank Urbanic, right?
Urbanic. Yes, he sent us a mailer that talked about critical race theory. It talked about the need to fund police and fire and not BLM. It talked about.
He sent this to you and Rod?
Oh, on the mailer that was sent to our home. So
is Mr. Urbanic under the impression that BLM is getting funding from the city of Oklahoma?
And at the bottom of the priority list was dealing with like homelessness and roads.
Right.
So,
but I mean,
that was at the bottom of the things to tackle.
I don't know your husband's political leanings, but I know that he married you, and I know where you at on some of these issues. And it just strikes me that someone did not tailor their voter segment correctly in mailing that to you, as if someone believes that you are movable on this.
Let's just say there was a return to sender and a note on the postcard. I gave a little bit of feedback.
Fair enough.
That's fantastic.
That's funny.
I love it.
We've received no mail from any of the candidates here thus far, although I expect in about 3 weeks that we will get a deluge of mail.
All the
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. One of our neighbors has a very large Frank Urbanic sign, which I thought was interesting. They're down on the corner, but I was like, huh, okay, look at that. So
Are they also out on the street?
Well,
what's that?
yeah, there's
I was a pun, you
billboards.
guys.
There's
You said it's
well,
down on the
and
corner, and I said, are they also out in the street?
Oh, it's a song. I see what
There
you
you
did
go.
there.
aha.
Who?
I
Right.
guess it's that, election reminder that yard signs and billboards don't win elections. You have to communicate with the people. So
That's right.
um,
That's right. Well, and to
that's
say that,
important.
yeah, Mayor Holt, based on recent polling, has a very comfortable lead of well over 50%. I think he won last time with like 74% or something of the vote. It was
Mhm.
a commanding victory. So
And the thing to remember, I believe, with these races, they're nonpartisan, correct?
they are. That's correct. Yeah, they are.
So I think that might be another factor because the last time he ran, there wasn't 4 people running. And so that makes your lead a lot higher in percentage of votes that you get. Because I believe it wasn't it like she was young. Wasn't she like 18 or 20 years old on the ballot? It was something like that. And so now there's 3 other people, which, you know, each of those candidates will pull votes away. So
Right. Yeah. We'll watch it. It'll be interesting. I have here in my hands my absentee ballot. You can hear the sound of the paper. And the only thing on this ballot for me is mayor.
there are school board
That's right.
races.
There are some Oklahoma City school board races.
Yes, especially for Oklahoma City public schools.
Right.
So
I think Edmond as well, probably several others. As a reminder, you can go to the election board website, elections.ok.gov. You can look at your sample ballot. You can see what's on there, what races that you'll be voting in. You still have time to request your absentee ballot. You can request those for a couple more weeks. If you want to do that, voting by mail is super easy and safe. And, as long as you return it on time, your vote will be counted. And then, Bailey, you had mentioned earlier, and we'll talk about this probably next week, that the city of Oklahoma City has just this week released their redistricting maps. So they have to, just like the state did, the city has to redraw the city council wards. And so they've done that. I've had obviously some communication with them about that because of my connection to that issue. And so we'll share a brief bit about that. There's not a ton to talk about. I think, honestly, the maps look pretty decent, which is relieving, right? So that's good.
yeah, very very little changes. It feels
Yeah,
like so.
that's right. All right, folks. Well, anything else that you want to touch on before we go?
There was one thing I wanted to mention on the McGirt issue when we were talking about McGirt. It was so interesting because the governor made a Facebook or like social media message trying to talk about the dangers of McGirt and how you shouldn't believe the tribes, that it's not that big of a deal, about how a dog got loose by a person who wasn't home and went into through the doggy door and attacked another man's 2 dogs viciously, and that because the person who owned the dog was a member of a tribal nation, that he couldn't pursue justice for his dogs. Therefore, that's an example of what's going to happen with McGirt. And that was just mind-blowing to me of the reaches on the narrative of this McGirt case and what sovereignty means for the state. So
Yeah, that was
that was very interesting.
that was a weird take, right? To be like, oh, okay, this a dog died, so we should overturn the Supreme Court ruling. I'm not saying it's not
Right.
dramatic. I'm just saying that seems pretty extreme.
I'm about as
For
big
sure.
of a dog fan as it gets. And even I was like, come on, bro.
Reaching.
Like, come on, bro. Like, we're talking about people's lives here. Like, come on. And
Yeah.
also, he was like, the police can't do anything about it. And it was like, I mean, the tribal police could do all kinds of things about it, right? Like all of his messaging about McGirt acts like that, like city and state police in Oklahoma, like non-tribal law enforcement is the only law enforcement that exists, when the tribes actually have very well-trained, well-funded, and active police departments of their own. Anyway.
Well, and it was fascinating because the Tulsa World, I can't remember if this was an editorial or just a piece, but they mentioned that a lot of the cases that were referenced of, I guess, the state losing that authority to prosecute or whatever, that they were tried at the federal level. And so there wasn't necessarily gaps of like no interactions and with the justice system or no consequences, but there's been, cases that either went through tribal courts or they went through federal courts. So that was interesting.
Yeah, no, they are drumming up chaos about stuff that's already been handled so many times, and it just makes me crazy. Just now as we're recording, Congresswoman Stephanie Bice I just saw a tweet from her from a couple of hours ago about in-person education is critical to a child's cognitive development. If we deny them this, we are failing them. We cannot allow the next generation to fall behind. Schools can and should remain open. And I'm like, everybody wants schools to be open, but when you have too many people that are sick, that you don't have the ability to staff the classroom, and it's making more people sick, like that's what happens. There are ways to keep schools open. We could require masks, right? We could promote vaccines. Like we have tools in our toolbox to make this happen, but it's
You
like,
just got to use them.
no, but just screaming that you want schools to be open is not going to make them open.
Well, and even Andy, hopefully next week we can talk about this because we didn't even get to touch on some of the federal stuff that's been really interesting. But she also has some thoughts about voting rights legislation too.
Oh
So.
gosh, yeah, we should talk about that because that's hopefully something will happen next week with that. We'll see. The Senate has adjourned for the weekend. They'll come back on Tuesday and allegedly are going to vote on the For the People Act. We'll see. All right, friends. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you both for being here. Scott, thank you.
Hey, man, wouldn't miss it.
Bailey, thank you for being here.
Of course. Happy to be here on my birthday.
On your birthday. All right, well,
Happy
go celebrate.
birthday.
Listeners, please mark your calendars for the election on February 8th. Also, don't forget that there is candidate filing deadlines in April. There are plenty of races. If any of you are an attorney and would like to run for district attorney for Oklahoma County, Lord knows we need some more good candidates there. Please consider filing. Reach out if you want to talk about it, as well as a number of other county seats, statewide offices, legislative seats. Lots of options there. If you ever consider running for office, hey, now's the time. It's not too late. The primary election will be in June, the general election in November. We'll keep you in the loop the whole way through. Remember, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a good week.